Thank you, Vaishnavi, and thank you, Tapshi, for giving us this wonderful conscious pause on really nourishing our spirit. Now that we have a little more energy, there is another important conversation that we can all delve into more deeply, because this one is an important one as well, which is all around how can each one of us really create a more inclusive world and inclusive spaces for everyone, where each one of us can say, yes, I belong, I am seen, I am heard, I am valued, I am respected, and therefore I can show up as the best version of myself. So the topic we want to really cover next is called the macro, or rather the micro is the new macro. And let me explain how we came up with this title. One of the things we've been researching at Genomics is what causes women to leave, not just the workforce, but also what just causes any of you to go from one organization to another. And one thing that all of you have been sharing with us publicly as well as privately is that you leave when you feel undervalued. And you feel undervalued not just because of one or two big things. When you see a series, when you see an accumulation of micro inequities or microaggressions over the course of your career, that is what causes you to leave. And that is why I think it's so important for us to really pay attention to this micro and make it the macro. Really go after these micro inequities and eliminate them with more rigor than ever before, if we're truly and consciously going to create an inclusive workplace for women and for everyone else. So it gives me great pleasure to now introduce to you the wonderful panel that we have put together. All right, welcome. Very, very warm welcome to each and every one of you. I'm just going to take a few minutes to introduce everyone briefly, and then I will hand it over to our very amazing moderator, whom I will introduce shortly as well. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming each and every one of our panelists. We have with us, first and foremost, Nita Tewari. Nita is a managing director at Accenture with over 25 years of experience in leading large client operations. She's a firm believer that people are the biggest assets and invests a lot of her time and energy in grooming the next generation of leaders. And in particular, she's doing a lot of work to groom women leaders through Accenture's Insights Women Leadership Program. We're also joined by Shweta Murarka. Shweta is head of global banking at HSBC India, an award-winning investment banker and business leader. And also, and the reason why she's part of this discussion is because she's a passionate advocate for inclusion. She, in fact, founded the first international branch of the Diversity Network Balance in HSBC and was subsequently nominated as global co-lead for that network. And she has now helped to expand that network to over 30 countries and 50,000 employees. I'm also very delighted to welcome Zanna Patel. Zanna, born in Mumbai, describes herself as a proud transgender person. She currently works with Pernod, Ricard, India, as a chief inclusion and diversity leader. And prior to that, she was the director for diversity and inclusion at KPMG. And she also currently serves as the Western India representative in the National Council for Transgender Persons and is a Kamal Nayan Bajaj Aspen Global Fellow. Also, we have with us Neha Bagaria. She is the founder and CEO of JobsForHer, which many of you might be familiar with, has helped millions of women start and restart their careers. She's been listed in Forbes India's W Power Trailblazers list of 25 groundbreaking women achievers as a game changer and an innovator who's shattering stereotypes. And finally, last but not least, I want to leave you all in the very, very capable hands of Shanti Maria, who's going to be moderating this discussion. And Shanti is the Director for Diversity and Inclusion and CSR at Target. She lives and breathes diversity. She's a corporate veteran in the learning and development space who firmly believes her lived experiences have always informed her choices. And for Shanti, what growth looks like is helping her organization create more inclusive and equitable spaces. And she's truly committed to absorbing everything around her and learning as much as she can along the way. So Shanti, thank you so much. And thank you to all of you as well. Shanti, I'll now leave this discussion with you.
Thank you, Bhavna, for that lovely introduction. And it's hard to follow that act, right? That energy and the passion that Bhavna brings to the table. I hope I'm able to sustain that, especially while we lead towards lunchtime. So be there. I know that you're having a fabulous time at this summit over yesterday and today. And just throw in some love through emoticons for the group that has brought this together. If what's one emoticon that you will share on how you're feeling right now on whatever you've learned and what you're going to learn through the summit. Good afternoon, everyone. Everyone who has joined here and has committed to be a conscious woman. You know, before I begin, I want to run by a couple of scenarios to you. How many times have you noticed a pattern where maybe your male colleagues are interrupting you in a team meeting? Or how many times have you heard the comment, hey, can you take the notes for the meeting? Hey, we have a woman here who can take really good notes. Let's do that. Have you been excluded in fun conversations because the majority wants to go drinking or pubbing or play golf or something that maybe you are not interested in, right? These are just some very, very small examples that I'm giving you of micro-inequities that many women and maybe even other segments or other dimensions face on a daily basis at work, in family circles, in home. And even if I want to start talking about how Indian families and the DNAs in Indian families run with micro-inequities, some things that I face with, oh, I wish you were a little fairer, you would have gotten a better person to marry. Oh, I wish you were a few inches taller. Oh, your hair, it's falling a lot. What's happening? Are you not sleeping? You should do this and that and this and that. And then comes all the recommendations and suggestions, right? What I'm trying to get at is the issue with micro inequities that eventually add up a lot and leave people feeling undervalued at work, disrespected, doubting themselves, their self-confidence, right? And very often, unfortunately, the majority is women, right? Like Bhavna said, research shows that women just don't leave work or break from their careers because of a major life event. They also leave because of this accumulated aggression that they are facing, right? So being conscious about these inequities and doing our part to remove them is the only way. It's a very slow process. It is a very long process, but it's totally worth it if we are serious about strengthening our culture of inclusion where we are. So the reality is that microaggressions is not so micro in terms of the impact that it is making. And the apt title that the micro is the new macro. And today you have this glamorous screen that you see right now with these beautiful faces. What's bringing them together is also they are accomplished leaders in their own space. They are here to make us more conscious about the micro inequities that we are seeing in our areas of work, and they are committed to the cause of inclusion in their own way. All of us play a role in creating that inclusive culture. Everybody plays a role that they are best positioned to play. So I'm going to now quickly move to our fabulous panel. And Zainab, my first question is to you. Thank you for joining this conversation. So Zainab, tell us, have you observed examples of microaggressions against women, particularly trans women in the workplace? And what are micro inequities? Like, tell us more about that experience.
Okay, thank you so much. But I wanted to actually set the stage by talking a little about the difference between macro and microaggression, and then go on to talk about micro inequities. First of all, macroaggression, as we know it, as understand it, is something that happens at a systemic level. Unequal pay practices, condition for a certain group of people, like say trans people. You're supposed to walk like a woman or behave like a man, not dress up too flashy, not allow body parts to hang out of your clothes. And in some time, for me, macroaggressions and microaggressions kind of, contrast each other, because microaggressions for me are very intentional or non-intentional verbal, non-verbal behaviors that happen in our everyday interactions. Most of the time they go unacknowledged because they tend to casually degrade people, demean people, put down someone who's part of a group. That could be because of the gender, the race, ethnicity, religion, body type, orientation, identity. And we know that at least 2/3 women at the workplace experience some amount of microaggression on a day-to-day basis. Now, I want to talk to you about the similarities and dissimilarities between what trans people face and what women face at the workplace. But I don't really want to call out something different, but I just have like 5 examples from my own life. Like, for example, when I transitioned and I had breast augmentation done, people would only look at my breast and speak to me as if the rest of my face had disappeared, or my face had metamorphized into my breast, and that's their way of addressing it. And there is this one line which you'll come across: sweetheart, can you get this thing done? And for me, the first is, no, I am not your sweetheart. Calling women, trans people by these seemingly endearing terms, and is often not appreciated. And for me, I find it really offensive if someone goes ahead and does this for me. Uh, Another aggression that we kind of look at is same behavior but different descriptions. Like, for example, if I'm working in a group with multiple peoples, and they come up and tell me, oh Zainab, it's so much nicer behaving with you, talking with you, you're so different than the other trans people. You're not as bossy, not aggressive, you're not intimidating to us, and we actually like people like you. Then, another microaggression, benevolent sexism. Like how we often, like, for example, in one of my ex offices, because I had this habit of coming in late and going in later in the evening, so that I actually like the quiet time after 6, because the office would really become nice and quiet and you could focus on some writing work. And someone who was in the management team would always call me up at 7 and say, you should go home. And I said, I mean, I liked it. I took it as a concern once, twice thing. For me, this entire, there's a line dividing concern with benevolent sexism. It's kind of almost the belief or acting if women or trans people are so weak and they need protection of men always. the last bit is, underestimating, and look at it from a trans woman or a women perspective. People assume that I cannot do a technical role or a leadership role in the company. They may never be able to fathom us in the board. My intelligence or my skills or my expertise is often underestimated. I'm assumed not to be ambitious, or I'm expected not to be as ambitious. Or like you mentioned, taking down notes. Oh, Zainab writes fabulously good notes. Why doesn't she, like last time, write the notes and quickly share that with us? And more often than not, I am pretty senior member at most meetings, and most of the other people either would ignore me or would not shake hands with me, because they feel I might feel offended if they come ahead and shake hands with me, and their own comfort level, and being ignored and yet being invisibilized despite being a visible trans person. And I guess these are some things which I wanted to bring to your attention and to the attention. And I think each one of us can find some reference to what we've gone through in our birth. It doesn't matter what organs you have on your body, but as long as you have a gendered existence, all of these factors do come into play. Thank you, Shanti.
Zainab, that was fabulous. And thank you for breaking that down with the examples that you shared with us. Just tells us that, hey, inclusion for all genders, right? Microaggressions for all genders is something that we should pause and reflect on. And sometimes it's unintentional, and the intent may be good, but then it's not really impacting in the right way. And that actually leads me to my next question to Nita. Nita, what is the role that leaders can play to ensure they create a safe environment for everyone to speak openly and speak up against micro-inequities if and when they arise?
Thanks for the question, Shanti. And before I start off to respond, first of all, thank you for inviting me and Accenture to this forum. I think it's a very important forum because I truly believe the fact that, in this day and age, we keep talking equality all the time. And, if we do not address this micro and macro inequities which are happening within the ecosystem, we are never going to, we would not reach equality, right? So that's clearly something we need to focus on. And this forum really addresses it. So thanks for organizing it as well. I think your question had two parts to this, right? One would be what leaders can do to address.
Yes.
And the second one, the way I interpret it, is also how the organizations need to structure themselves to address this micro inequities, right? And I'll give you the example. Being from Accenture, I think we are very conscious about this. And I'll talk more about what we do in Accenture, and if folks want to share what happens in other organizations, happy to take that on board as well. One of the key things is Accenture conducted a research in 2019 where we looked at getting to equal, right? And there was a lot of findings from it. And what we realized was that we had already been following it, but more importantly, the elements which were coming out of it were how connected do people feel in their workplace? And that's a very big one, especially having been through pandemic, etc. How connected are we with the workplace, bringing our whole selves to work, professionally and personally, right? And this is where we believe that there are three key pillars to how we can make our work environment a lot more comfortable, where people feel safe to bring up these inequities happening within the ecosystem, right? The first one is bold leadership. I think the word says it all. The second one is more about what's the comprehensive action which the company is taking, its policies, its practices to address them, right? Especially where it comes to the fact that there is a safer environment where you can bring these up and these get addressed, right? And I think there's a third one, which essentially talks of the empowering environment where we are really talking about how can you go about expressing these and feeling safe about it. Because there is always this fear of some kind of a retaliation or penalty coming your way, right? And Accenture is very, very particular. In fact, we have a very strict policy, which is speaking up and zero tolerance to retaliation, right? And therefore, the environment that you are in becomes extremely important. How does the environment empower you to bring it to the table, right? And for us, it's not true just for women, but it's also true for men, that they feel safe to bringing it up. But more so for women, because it's very personal. It's subtle, just the way Zainab said, right? There are those subtle cues also which happen, which are those microaggressions. It could be something like, not including the person in the meeting or taking notes, just the example you gave, right? How do you express that this is an inequality which is happening to you and not fear retaliation? Mm-hmm. Right. So that's more the organizational framework that you need, in which people truly feel secure. They feel that they are safe with zero, retaliation happening to them as well. And as leaders, and the more important part of your question, which was, as leaders, what do we do to ensure that we are addressing these inequities which are happening? The first one essentially is keep an open door policy. And that's what we do even in Accenture. I do it myself. And when, while the phrase is open door, there is a literal meaning to this, and there is a more of a metaphor to it as well, where you're
tell
really
us more
about exactly. So where you're really talking about your ability to listen and take action and help the other person to feel that you have addressed it in workplace, right? And just as an example, right? Whenever I sit in my room, there certain meetings are confidential, but whenever I'm not in meetings where I can keep my door open, I literally keep my door open, simply because so that I can observe the floor if something's happening, or just take action, and people should feel welcomed, right? The second bit is, how do you educate your employees that if something is happening to you and you're feeling stressed about it, you're feeling that this is not right, how do you table it? Bring that courage within the system to enable you to table it, because otherwise you'll keep suffering without really talking about it. Third one, and the one which I mentioned, was basically you need to take action and then address the inequality. And as leaders, I think we need to educate our leaders to spot those micro inequities, because they're not very jarring. They need to become conscious when they are in a group that something like this is happening. Maybe the person is not being spoken to, they are not including that person in the discussion, or the person has been trying to raise and express a view and somebody's talking over the other person, right? So you have to try and educate the leaders to be more observant about this and make sure that they are doing something about it and correcting it there and then. And real time is the best way, really, to address these. What's critical is, if the leaders, managers, and all the people who are around start following this, it will automatically cascade within the organization, right? And I think that's a very, very important part of addressing the inequities.
Nita, thank you for sharing those really practical examples at Accenture that is helping you make a more inclusive culture. And while the audience is listening to our speakers, think about the questions that are coming up. Think about what you'd like to ask about this topic. There will be a section towards the end where you can ask your questions to the speakers. My next question would be to Shweta. Shweta, what can women do if they are at the receiving end of microaggressions? Like, can you share an example of how you would navigate a situation like that?
Thank you, Shanti, firstly for having me on this panel. And I mean, like Nita and Zainab has mentioned, women would be definitely sometime or the other at this receiving end of microaggression. And when they are, it becomes a little tricky, you know, how to raise the whole thing. Because obviously, like my co-panelist and you have also raised, sometimes, you know, microaggression can be compared to small mosquito bites. You know, when one mosquito sort of bites you, you get irritated. But then if you have thousands of mosquito bites or you have thousands of small cuts, then, you know, the compounding impact of that could be like really devastating. So what I'm trying to say is that if you look at a single instance just by itself, it might not seem very big. So it becomes tricky because if you raise this to the person who has impacted you, they might outright dismiss you as being overtly sensitive, or they might say, hey, I didn't mean it that way. Or, you know, even in the modern jargon, just chill. It's okay, right? So hence it becomes a bit tricky as to how you go about raising it. And sometimes the other person also comes from a place that they are a bit unintentional about the whole thing, and they themselves do not realize that they have done it. And perhaps you want to not bring it up because you think that you should forgive them because they have been a bit unintentional. But I would say that if it is impacting you, you need to raise it, right? I mean, personally, I wouldn't raise any sort every instance of microaggression. I would pick my battle. And the way I would choose the instances that I really need to raise is looking at maybe two lenses. One, if it impacts me for over a few hours, I would definitely go ahead and raise it. You know, if it stays in my mind, which means it is impacting me in some way or the other. If I have any sort of negative feelings associated with it, for instance, you know, if I feel excluded, if I feel a lack of confidence, if I feel stressful or any other negative feeling associated with the whole event, and that lingers on, again, I would definitely raise it. And I can share a small instance, although it's not in the realms of an office or professional world, where not very far back, I was a victim of microaggression. In my words, I would call that a microaggression. So I do play lawn tennis, and you know, apart from me, all the people who do play lawn tennis are men. We do have a common tennis WhatsApp group where if anyone goes to play tennis, they invite and they tell people that, you know, we are going if you want to join. So that has been the way to go about it. When suddenly, you know, a few men, or maybe just one or two, decided that they could take the liberty of writing in their small boys group, or moving all the discussions from the tennis group to the little boys club that they have created on their own. And there was a while where I didn't even realize that people were playing tennis, and I would just not go to play the game because I thought they weren't. And they thought that, or they assumed rather, that I would have got the information because my husband is in the boys group, but he's not, you know, very active on WhatsApp and all. So initially, I would say that initially for a day or two, I thought I will work around it. And my intention was to play tennis and not to fight with anyone. So I did try my way around it. And I just used to check my husband's phone as to has any message come in the boys group. But obviously, I didn't want to do that. That's so wrong, right? Or I would just call him if he is outside somewhere. I would call him to check if there is any message that has been dropped. Or, you know, when he would see a message, he would let me know that, you know, people are playing tennis. Why don't you go? But I mean, although I found a way around it, I would, for the next few days, whenever I used to go play tennis, I would just not feel welcome. I would feel excluded. I would feel a bit irritated. And I don't know, I can't explain what all I would feel, but it was all sort of different negative feelings. And then I decided to raise it. So when you raise it, like Nita said, there definitely could be a retaliation depending on the person with whom you are raising it. So you have to be a bit strategic about raising it as well. So obviously you have to keep the emotions aside for a moment and think how you would raise it so that the person gets the point, as well as perhaps you don't see that kind of retaliation. So I looked at, who could be my allies in this situation. And there were a few people who had faced similar situation in the past. Maybe they were not exactly this, not exactly exclusion, but with this person, they're not seen the same kind of, inclusivity overall. So I knew I had allies, and I was a bit strategic around it. On Women's Day, when they were playing tennis and I knew they were playing tennis, I just went for a walk. And, when they wished me Happy Women's Day, I said, hey, thanks. And, our tennis group is really diverse, but you know what, it could be a bit more inclusive as well. And I think since then, they've got the message, things have fallen in place. I did have a bit of retaliation, by the way. Not that much, because that person has been thinking of me as a little headstrong, so-called, or whatever his version of that, term. But I don't mind. I mean, I don't care, because now things are in place. I feel more included, more welcome, and things are falling in place. So yes, this is how I would choose to raise it. And I would say that be strategic, find your allies, keep the emotions out of it, because and do not target the person who's done it. In my case, I didn't say that you are doing this or you are doing that. I said our group could be a bit more inclusive. So I was just talking about the problem at hand and not really about the person. So it's important to separate, the person from the problem and talk about the problem and not really the person. And I would say that if you are seeing microaggression, like Nita was mentioning, it is so important to be ally. It's really important that when we see it, sometimes the person who is facing it finds it very difficult to raise it, because it is so subtle, because it is perhaps as small as a mosquito bite just by itself. But if they see that there is an ally, they would get the courage. Or if, even you could raise it for them, even better. If you think they are getting dismissed and they want to raise it. So if it happens with you, decide if you want to raise it strategically, but definitely be ally and look around. And if it's happening with others, do help and support them to raise it.
More power to you, Shweta. I love how you dealt with your personal situation too. Being subtle but not so subtle, that's a lovely art to have for all of us, right? And there are so many things that you've brought into the conversation here. That single paper cut that is constantly happening, that can become a wound. Hence, think, pause, and act how you want to handle the micro inequities. You could be at the receiving end. I want the audience also to think of, are you at the giving end of the micro inequities? And the point that Shweta brought out around allyship, are you that bystander who is letting that paper cut happen day in and day out? Because you feel, hey, I'm not in that equation. And think about what you can do to be that ally and move away from just that bystander role for that inequities. My next question, Neha, is to you. Given the importance of the culture of inclusion, what is your advice to the women re-entering the workforce? With JobsForHer, your mission is to make sure that you get women closer to the workforce, empower them, make them more independent. What would you say are some critical signals women should look out for to ensure an organization is truly inclusive and that they will be valued there?
All right. Wow. First of all, Shanti, thank you so much for inviting me here. And I'm still actually taking in a lot of the stuff that the other three panelists spoke about. I think there were some really amazing insights over here. And it actually, as everybody was speaking, I was thinking about this last 7-year journey at JobsForHer and the number of biases and stereotypes that we have seen during this journey. And I think women returnees really face the brunt of a lot of these biases. If women who are working in the workplace and haven't taken a break, if they are facing biases, you can just, magnify that and multiply that and think about what a woman returnee faces, who was working at some point, took a break in her career and is now looking at getting back. In fact, and of course, the reason I had started this company was because I was one of those women. You know, I went through this myself, and I went through all the biases. And I have to say, I continue to face a lot of these biases as they come along, right? But when it comes to the company point of view, and of course, by the way, there are lots of biases when it comes to the personal arena, the family arena, and societal arena when it comes to women returnees. But when it comes to the company space as well, there are lots of deep-rooted biases. And most of the time, and I think that's very important for us to realize when we're having this discussion, that each one of us carry biases. Yeah, and those biases are usually deep-rooted in our upbringing, in our exposure, in just what we have seen and heard of this world. And which means that those biases can also be changed. I mean, it really means like getting the other person to think in a different way or experience a different kind of a person. Yeah. And which is why, Zainab, you would find so many biases for you in India because it's completely new for them. They've not experienced that ever. Yeah. But that same person, now that when they meet you, they can suddenly look at the world with a different worldview. And the same thing was true of women returnees. You know, so when I started JobsForHer 7 years ago, we made it very clear that the platform was specifically for women on a break. And when we started talking to companies, we made it very clear to them as well. And what was also interesting was that we never went at it from a social point of view. We never told them that you should hire women on a break because it's a good thing to do or it's nice for society, or, you know, we never spoke to anybody from CSR, for example. We always told them that you need to hire these women on a break because they are an incredible talent pool, right? They come in with experience, they come in with qualifications, great capabilities. They have a fire in their bellies to prove themselves, and they'll join you at no notice period. Now, that itself was a very different approach of looking at this whole cohort of women returnees, right? Versus looking at them with, you know, how you called it, benevolent sexism, or with sympathy or pity. We suddenly look at them with wow, like, you know, this with pride, right? Like if a woman has taken a break in her career, in fact, she shows that she's a very dedicated person. You know, she has made the difficult choice of being there for her family when she needed it. So of course, you know, it was a pretty uphill battle. There were enough companies that told us we don't want to hire women returnees because we feel that they're not serious about their careers. Many of them even told us we don't want to hire mothers. And that was, of course, very shocking to all of us, especially because my starting team, and by the way, even today, 85% of the JobsForHer team are mothers. I used to be like, what? Why would you not want to hire mothers? And they used to be like, you know what? We hired a mother and then she quit in like a week because she couldn't manage. So we've decided not to hire mothers. There are those companies that still exist over there. I really hope that a lot of the work that we are doing, a lot of the work that panels like this is doing, is working towards reducing that count of companies over there. Today, I'm happy to tell you that we have 9,000 companies on the platform, right? We started with 27 years ago. Now, when it comes from the women perspective, right, what to look out for, how do you know whether this is going to be the right place for a woman who's restarting her career? That is why we started JobsForHer, because we realized that when women were going through other platforms, most of the time, recruiters are told that I want you to hire a woman who has these particular capabilities and is working in these particular companies. Now, when that recruiter sees a break in the resume, he or she doesn't know what to do with it, and that resume goes to the bottom of the pile. Now, in this case, when recruiters were coming to JobsForHer, they knew that all the women here were going to have a break in their resumes. So that suddenly did not become a criteria for rejection anymore to start with. Secondly, came the whole understanding, the fact that just because you've taken a break in your career doesn't mean you've taken a break from learning. Yeah. And for women to realize that, you know, during those years that I've taken a break, I actually added a lot of different skills to my repertoire, which can now help me in my job. And at JobsForHer, we like to call that life experience skills. So from a women's point of view, when that woman is looking to get back to work, it is definitely important to find the right kind of company, yeah, which will be welcoming, which will be nurturing, which will actually push her up instead of pull her further down. Yeah. And there are lots of ways to find that out. First and foremost, if a company is specifically putting it out there in their marketing communications that we are welcoming women back to work. Now, it is absolutely not uncommon for companies to have specific returnee programs for women returnees. When I started, there were a handful of companies like Accenture, of course, has always been a front runner when it comes to, promoting D&I in the workplace. But now tons of companies, including startups, are all coming up with women returning programs just so that women feel welcome to come back. Second, when you go for that interview, there are lots of different signals that you get in that interview about whether this company is really walking the talk. Yeah, because in many cases, remember that, at the leadership level, you will have all the right mindsets and all the right intentions. But in many companies, it doesn't percolate down. It doesn't percolate to that final recruiter or that final hiring manager or that final colleague who you're going to be interacting with all the time. So, for example, questions such as that why did you need a maternity? I mean, and these are all, by the way, questions that women on a break have been asked, okay, and because we hear it all the time. That maternity leave is for 6 months. Why did you need to take 5 years of maternity leave? Okay. Or questions like, when are you planning your second child? Do you plan to take a break around then too? Or questions like, are you sure you're going to be able to manage getting back to work? Who will take care of your kids when you're at work? What will happen when your kids become older? Will you want to take a break then because they'll be in the teenage years? Or these all show that the company doesn't get it. Yeah, that recruiter doesn't get it. So even though you might have crossed the first barrier of getting shortlisted with your resume that has a break, during the interview, when such questions come up, you need to also realize again, and like Sweta said, instead of reacting to these questions, it's important to respond to these questions, right? It's important to realize also that this person is right now mired with a lot of personal biases, which it's possible that the company might not have. And that distinction is important to make. That is it this person's individual biases, or is this company has that kind of culture which is not going to be welcoming to a woman returning? And for that, I think it's important to first of all answer these questions with a lot of dignity and poise, which means that if there is a particular question that should not be asked in an interview, please feel free to say that, that's something that I will figure out. Okay, I am here looking at getting back to work because I know I'll be able to manage, because I know that I'll be able to handle whatever support is required at home. So all you need to care about is whether my capabilities and my skills are a good fitment with your requirements. And then also interact with a lot of other people in that organization. Do that research, check how many women work in that organization. Try to reach out to some of the women over there and see what kind of journeys they have had. And especially if you can find a woman who has restarted her own career, because we're making a point also to have companies to really showcase the fact that they have other women who've restarted their careers in the organization, which will always help that company become much more women returning friendly. So yes, biases are aplenty, but that does not mean that we stop ourselves in our hunt for that perfect opportunity. And it is actually part of our responsibility to also get other people to change their perspectives and their biases.
Yeah. Neha, thank you. The fire in the belly that you spoke about, I just saw a snapshot of that in the last 3 minutes when you were sharing all the inspiration and your observations, right? From 20 companies to 9,000 companies and inspiring them to think differently for women. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to swiftly move into questions that the audience have already started posting on the chat. And my first question is from Niharika Sahu, and this question is for Nita. I'm going to read it out for your benefit, Nita. Accenture is an industry best case on how diversity and inclusion is driven as a company culture. If you could share a few pointers on how do you sustain this culture, also any tips on how to come up with data-driven D&I, indexes and publicly, publish it in the public forums.
Sure. I think inclusion and diversity is a very, very big agenda in Accenture, right? And we are very conscious about it. And, I loved what Neha talked about of returning mothers. We have an entire program around it where we are looking at returning mothers, and we focus on that as well. So the inclusion and diversity program is a very, wide program, and it has a scope defined to it. And the way we have a clear mandate and a team which is dedicated towards running the program, which ensures that every aspect of inclusion and diversity is covered. Returning mothers is one part of it. We have different programs, the Pride program, which we have, where we really look at the different types of, whether it's the diversity mix, or it is the gender mix, or the inclusion of people of different sexual preferences, etc. All of that comes together, right? There is, and every segment of our organization has a senior managing director who sponsors it as well. And we do drive it in a very conscious way with forums, seminars, etc., which enable us to make sure that there is more consciousness and awareness within the organization. To the extent we have leadership training programs, which talk about how, you as a leader need to drive that at your individual levels within the organization, right? Absolutely, we do have indicators. I would need to go and check if we can make it public, but happy to share that with this group if, we are able to publish it or not. Yeah, but I can come back to you on that.
Thank you, Nita, so much for sharing that. The next question is from Shilpakala, and I think I would address this question to Shweta. Shweta, how to break the bias that women are the primary caretakers and men are secondary, which is so deeply rooted in our society? Because this kind of acts as a barrier for, for careers that women build. The bias leading to stereotype, leading to microaggressions at workplace.
Well, I mean, I wish there was an easy answer to this, is all I can say. It just is so ingrained that people just don't get it. I'll just share an example of, again, when I got back from my maternity leave, we were starting another location for the business that I was a part of leadership. So we were expanding in China, and my baby was 5 months old. My boss would come to the meeting and ask my male colleagues in particular, hey, Mr. A or Mr. B, can you go to China? Can you make a trip and just do some inspection as to if that is the right place for us to set up? And he never asked me. I thought perhaps I'm not performing at that level, or I just did feel a bit underconfident about the whole thing. And later on, I mean, generally he was an open person. I mean, generally he was a person who was of very, very progressive thoughts. And later on, I did pick this up with him when we just met casually over a dinner. So he was sounding very confused and surprised. He was like, how would you have gone? You had a 5-month baby. I'm like, I'm the person who should be able to decide that. Instead of you taking that decision on my behalf, I would have appreciated. I understand your concern and where you were coming from, but I could have managed. My husband could have taken a break and he could have been with the baby or whatever. And anyways, I had weaned off because I had started working from office in the 4th month. So there was no way I could continue feeding, right? So he was for sure apologetic, but he just did not get the point that could even be a possibility. So the point is that sometimes situations like this put you in a place where you could have taken that opportunity. So ultimately, this other person in my team, my peer, got the opportunity to go to China, and that led better things for his career for sure. The whole situation could have been different if perhaps, my leader could have been a bit more sensitive or allowed me the decision to decide what I wanted to do at that particular point in time. So I would say it's a tough one. How do we break the bias is something that we have to do again through conversations, through bringing it up. And wherever you see such kind of behaviors prevailing, you do interrupt and act as an ally. So there's no better way, no other way. And obviously conferences and discussions like these do help progress the discussion. So thank you, Shanti. And thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Shweta. You know, all the points that all of us have brought on how different organizations are thinking about microaggressions, thinking about creating an inclusive culture, the structures, the policy, the practices. I think one thing that I feel very proud of at Target, you know, apart from that, there's 44% representation for women, and I have so much of inspiration as a, you know, with women leaders around me and with male allies. I think the one thing that we do really well here is listening forums and truly emulating why we have 2 ears and only one mouth. You know, all of us spend very little time listening, and that's the toughest thing to do. And forums, think about forums where you have 100 people and you're talking about, let's say, a topic like micro-inequities, and anybody is you know, allowed to speak about what they feel about it, how they are experiencing it, without a judgment, creating that safe space, and not actually saying, I'll solve for it, I'll come back with an action plan. This is just your forum to express what you say, right? So listening and observing how that micro inequities are showing up for each of us personally, and where we are at the giving end or at the bystander end of that micro inequities. I'll leave you with that thought. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time to take more questions. Thank you so much, Zainab, Neha, Shweta, and Nita, for bringing your fabulous perspectives to this conversation, for giving us so much food for thought to reflect and pause and think how we can make this a more inclusive environment for each of us. Thank you, everyone. Bhavna, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you for taking the time.